Big thank you to Dark John for helping me make this fixture to hold the third member for the 9-inch rear end in the vise. Came out pretty clean. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put this bearing inside the case. It's going to hold the end of the pinion, and in here is a spring clip, which is probably superior to this normal star washer that presses in there. So shout out Yukon for having high quality parts. And now I'm going to see if I can't get this fit in there. It's a little bit snug. Put a few drops of Lucas. Now with a small taper punch, see if I can't encourage it home. So now I got this bearing just below the lip, and we'll see if we can hear the sound change when it bottoms out. Pretty close. Oh, there we go. All right, so that's bottomed out. Now we'll see if we can't get this C-clip installed in there. Just like that, first bearing's in. Right now I'm filling all the holes in the ring gear with parts cleaner. Get these wire brushed and nice and clean. Then I'll do the same for the ring gear bolts and then install it onto the differential. Now that I got the holes all blown out with air and dry, we're gonna set the differential on there. I'm going to put a drop of red Loctite on each of these bolts, and we'll snug these together, and I'll get them torqued to 65 foot-pounds because these are 7/16 ring gear bolts, and that is a torque spec for a 7/16. Just keep tightening these down in a star pattern till the ring gear and the differential are connected, and then we'll clamp this thing in the vise and get them torqued. So now I'm going to work on the pinion support and pinion bearings, get the preload set, and get this all put together as a unit. The gears I got are REM polished, so it gets thrown into a vat of ceramic beads and abrasive liquids and things. Makes it real smooth, so it's quieter and doesn't make as much heat, and just works better. But one of the issues I found is that this bearing that normally gets pressed on just slides on with very little resistance. So I called Richmond Gear, who makes these, and they told me not to really worry about it, and that if I just set my bearing preload on the upper end, I should be okay. The gears I got are 3:9 ratio. The way I found that out was I went on Google, found a calculator, and entered the final drive of my first gear on my transmission, the height of what my rear tires are going to be, and it gives you a range of gears, and 3:9 landed kind of in the middle. So first bearing. Pinion support. Now, to set the preload, sometimes there's a crush washer, and then the other style is this shim pack in between these two bushings. So I'm just going to pull out half of these shims and put this on there, and then we'll see how close we are with our bearing preload. And the way I'm going to do this, since a normal factory pinion nut is ovalized on the top, it bites onto the threads pretty tight when you install it. So I took one of those nuts and I cut the ovalized part off of it so that I'll be able to install and uninstall this numerous times to make sure I get the proper preload set, and I won't be damaging the threads or messing up my pinion nut. So I'm just going to give this a few ugga-duggas and test the preload. Feels pretty good. Oh, and I can already tell that's way too tight. I don't even need to check it with the torque wrench. So now the process is going to be add shims to this until I get to the proper amount of preload. I'm going to set this around 20 inch-pounds, and then I will install the pinion seal and put the permanent nut on and get it torqued down. Well, I got pretty lucky and landed on the second try. So I added a few shims, gave this a few rotations back and forth, and then I got my inch-pound torque wrench and slowly turn till you see it start to move the bearings. So I'm at about 22 inch-pounds, which is pretty snug, but because of what I talked about earlier, I'm happy with that. So now I'll take this apart, install the seal, and then reassemble it for the final time. Now I'm just applying a small amount of silicone gasket maker on the inside of this pinion seal before I drive it into place. And I made sure I got my bearing back inside the pinion support before the seal goes on. A little bit of red bearing grease on the inside of the seal. And time for final assembly. This time with the actual pinion nut, and I'm going to take a little bit more gasket maker, and I'm going to put it around the base of this nut and around the splines, just to prevent any potential leaking later on. Now this does not call for thread locker because it has the self-locking nut, and its torque specification is 200 pound-feet. But I'm not sure exactly how I would hold this in place, and I've seen enough people do it without torquing it that I feel comfortable giving it maybe like 13.5 ugga-duggas. I think that's pretty accurate. Seems good to me. Recheck the bearing preload. Which looks good. This thing's all set. Now I'm working on getting these side bearings pressed on. So I'm going to make sure the taper is facing out, and I found a 1.5 inch electrical conduit coupler which fits on the race of the bearing and doesn't contact the cage at all, but it also fits over the outer bore of the differential. So I didn't have to purchase any expensive bearing pressing tool or anything like that. So that's going to go on here. Use this plate that came with the shop press. Got it part way on. Just want to check, make sure I'm not going to be shaving any material off the sides that I don't want to be. Looks like it's pressing on pretty straight, so I'm going to continue the press. Okay, I feel a decent amount of resistance there. I think it's bottomed out, and nice and square. Now the same will go for the other side. I'm ready now to install the ring gear and pinion and everything into the carrier. And before I pull these caps off, you can see it's already marked 2-2 and 1-1, so I won't get them mixed up, and the way it's machined will be precise when it goes back together. So I'm going to pull out these tabs that hold the spanners in and pull out all the main bolts. Now I'm just going to lube up these threads right here where the spanners are going to go. get my bearing races on these bearings. Set this in place. And I'm going to scoot it all the way over, so there's the most room for the pinion to come in when it's ready. Now I'll put these caps back on, hold everything in place, and get it bolted in the vise so it's a little easier to work on. Got it clamped in the vise, and I tightened up these spanners on each side till it was just snug enough to provide a little bit of drag when I go to spin it freely with my hand. Now I'm just going to set this pinion in place. And you may notice that the yoke is now black instead of gold like the one I installed in the original video. I had mistakenly put on a 1330 yoke, and I'm running 1350 U-joints, so I just swapped this one out. Same process as before. I'm just going to snug in 3 of these bolts, and I did not install the O-ring seal on the pinion support because I'm going to have to install and uninstall this several times till I get everything adjusted the way it needs to be. Now that the pinion support is bolted in, I need to set the backlash on the ring gear. You can see it has a little bit of movement, and that amount of movement needs to be 10 thousandths. So I'm going to get my dial indicator set up, and we'll measure this on 4 different parts of the ring gear, and we'll adjust it towards the pinion as necessary until we get 10 thousandths of backlash. Dial indicator is hooked up and zeroed out. And I have about 25 thousandths of backlash, which is over spec, which is what I anticipated because this has gotten moved over as far away from the pinion as possible. So we will loosen this and tighten this the same amount of holes away from the retainer clip and recheck. And after moving each spanner 3 pins, I am now right at 10 thousandths. Perfect. Now that the backlash is set, I'm going to torque the side bearing caps to 50 pound-feet. And this is not the final torque spec, because I may have to make another adjustment on this later. But now that these are somewhat tight, I can set the pinion depth and establish the gear pattern. To check the gear pattern, I'm using some of this patterning compound that came with the build kit, and I'm just going to paint this on both sides of 3 or 4 teeth, and then we'll run the ring and pinion past each other several times and see what the pattern looks like. Ran the first pattern, and it looks like it's showing the inner or the toe side of the drive side of the ring gear and the mid part of the coast side. It's more indicative on the ghost pattern, where you can see there So I believe that means the pinion is too close. So I'm going to add a shim, torque this down, and then check again. I decided to go ahead and add 2 shims to see if that gets me any closer. And I'm going to torque these down to 35 pound-feet because now I'm trying to set the final pattern and there's some shims in there. So I'm still only using 3 bolts, but I'm going to get them torqued all the way. Well, my guess of adding 2 shims was incorrect. 1 shim seems to create the best pattern, where the main contact bodies are directly across one another, slightly towards the toe side of the ring gear, which I'm fine with. So now I'm going to go ahead and put the O-ring on this, do the final install, torque all 5 of the bolts, recheck the backlash on the ring gear, and then I can do final torque on these side bearing caps and put in the retaining clips for the spanner nuts. Each of these is getting torqued to 35 pound-feet. Now the side bearing caps are getting final torque 85 pound-feet. Still right there. And finally, the spanner retainer clips. I'm going to put 1 drop of red Loctite on each of these. I previously cleaned these bolts and these holes here with parts cleaner and a Q-tip, so this Loctite can do its job. Let's snug these down. Just like that. Final assembly is complete. One last detail I did not include was which differential I went with. I got an Eaton True Track. It's a limited slip differential. You can kind of see the ends of the gears in here. It's operated with helical gears instead of clutch packs, and I've heard real good reviews of guys running high horsepower, autocross, road racing, so I have high hopes.